Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Safest Social Media Show. I'm your host, Brigetti Limbanda. I am a Goodwill ambassador and a live streaming advocate. I started my career raising awareness about the water crisis in South Africa, and I produce and host online shows and lead conversations with entrepreneurs and thought leaders. My amazing co host is Alison Diamond. Alison is a sociologist and a social media enthusiast, and she's concerned about disinformation and malicious behavior. She takes a sociological approach to examining the problems and to find user based solutions. And today, our conversation is about naming and shaming. So, on this show, which is called the Safest Social Media Show, we talk about how we as individuals can gain the ability to take a more critical look at the things we see online and how we can become more selective about how we use that information that we see online, and how that leads to freedom of disinformation. But today we're specifically talking about naming and shaming. So, hello, Alison.
Hello.
How
I'm
are you?
excited. I'm fine. How are you?
Yes, that is great. So, I want to let everyone know, welcome to the show, first of all. Um, Today we are talking about doxing as well as naming and shaming. And I want to let you know that we are live on different platforms. We are live on LinkedIn, on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, and Twitter. So wherever you are watching us on your social media platform of choice, welcome to the show. And I wonder if we should kick off first by just explaining or giving a brief outline of what both doxing or naming and shaming is about.
Sure.
So I'd kick that off with saying that it involves researching the details of people's lives with malicious intent. It's not just that you're just looking for someone's contact details or wanting to reach out to them. You're doing this with intent to make the details public. Um, and your intention is to harass, to abuse, to provoke fear, to even cause violence or physical harm to that person and or their family members. So it's a kind of a vigilante justice, if you wanted to say. So you're kind of taking the law in your own hands.
Yeah. I I'm going to define doxing, but what you've heard about naming and shaming in general does describe doxing, and I tend to see naming and shaming as sort of doxing light, because naming and shaming is pretty bad and it's meant to embarrass and humiliate and incite violence, like she said. But I think of doxing as taking it to another level. The idea of doxing is that you find documents, that's where the word comes from, uh, about the person, personal information. Sometimes you receive it through hacking, and sometimes you just get it off of public sites and you make it easily compilable in one place so everybody around the world, this unknown audience of people, can pile on and join the fray, often without knowing fully what it's all about. And this person and their family is victimized, and it causes a lot of problems, obviously, for victims.
Mm. Yeah, it's a minefield that needs addressing because you know it's something that we cannot ignore. It happens more and more, and sometimes it even leads to depression, people taking their lives. And so I think one needs to discuss whether we as individuals need to do something about it, whether it's okay, should we wait for legislation. And so, would you say that one can justify doxing or naming and shaming by means of extenuating circumstances? Do you think it's okay?
Um, Gosh, I don't like the practice, although I think the only way that I would support it is for reasons where all of us are affected by it. For example, for transparency in government. If there are things that we need to know, then the government is unwilling to provide that information, and we have a legal right and the moral right to know it, then I don't have a problem with it being leaked or, however it's done. But I don't like malicious doxing. Anything that's meant to harm somebody, no way, that's not justified.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a very fine line there, and I think one has to make that distinction
Mhm.
about whether or not it is something that you would engage in. Um, I think for me personally, I would want to consider the consequences of taking part in doxing.
Yeah.
Um, it may seem that you're justified, but you do walk the fine line of looking at criminal prosecution, for example.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and, irrespective of what that person did, what if that person takes their life, for example? Would, you make yourself liable for culpable homicide?
Yeah, one of
Um,
the things about doxing and naming and shaming in general is that really the laws that we have today haven't kept up with our digital abilities, so to speak. So we've got people who are really at home with the internet and social media and with all the things that you can do with technology to cause harm. But we've got people who make the laws who don't understand all that underlying technology, and our laws don't change as quickly as our behaviors do. So right now, people are using harassment, stalking laws, domestic violence. I mean, anything you can reach out for. Hate crimes, at least in this country. I don't know. Maybe you know a little bit about what's happening in South Africa, but here we've got a little ways to go to specify doxing across the country as a crime and really define it.
I think that's probably an issue worldwide, that there isn't a it's not well enough defined or well enough or documented well enough. And I see a huge problem that the law, I mean, in the US, for example, your law will differ from state to state, and the laws differ from country to country. And I often wonder whether that isn't what gives people the freedom or the loophole um, to engage in naming and shaming,
Mm-hmm.
because they understand that if they commit the crime of naming and shaming and doxing across a border,
Mm-hmm.
um, they will likely not be prosecuted.
Yeah, there are ways that the current laws, can be exploited because they don't uh, match the crime exactly, or they may be overreaching. So yeah, these loopholes are abused. So yeah, we have a ways to go, and we have to rely on the pre-digital era laws and any kind of amendments that have come along. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't really have a unified way of addressing doxing or naming and shaming. So on our Twitter chat, we did ask people what they thought should be done, and you actually had a response. I don't know if you can remember right offhand. I'm trying to look at our Twitter chat and um, pull up some things, but we did put it out there to people what you think should be done if there were legislation against doxing. What would be an adequate punishment?
Well, to me, there's one of the things I would suggest is, depending on the severity of the offense, is taking away that person's ability to be on social media entirely, either for a period of time or permanently, if it's severe enough.
Mm-hmm.
But in order for us to reach that kind of point, um, the providers of the social media platforms would have to put in specific mechanisms in place to circumvent what people currently do.
Mm-hmm.
People may think they're hiding, but the systems allow people to create fake profiles.
Mhm.
You know, on Facebook, for example, people don't even hide the fact that they may Twitter, Facebook may say, well, we don't allow it on our platform, but that there's no mechanism to stop people from having as many profiles as they like on
Sure.
Facebook, for
Yeah.
example.
Mhm.
The same on YouTube. You can have as many profiles as you like. On Twitter, it's a free for all.
Yeah.
You can have, even if you get banned under the one username, people will come back and say, well, hey, I'm back and this is my new username, follow me. And
Mhm.
if they have a large following, they have absolutely no difficulty with switching usernames whatsoever. It is that easy.
Mhm.
And
Facebook,
so,
on Facebook, I know there's a policy where they really started pushing for people to use their real names. So I don't know if you remember that, but if you had a nickname, and some of my friends do have nicknames, some of them were forced early on to switch to a legal name. So I think that was part of Facebook's way of, quitting or making people quit with the anonymity and maybe be a little more intimidated about being, online bullies or making nasty comments. But you know what? I have seen some things under people's real names, so I'm not sure it really abated a lot of that, but at least that was one of the policies they implemented.
I know that implemented the policy, but it's again, it's one thing about, having a policy in place is one thing, but
Mhm.
enforcing that policy and having consequences for not adhering to the policy is quite another. So,
Exactly.
I mean, I know of numerous people who still, despite that policy, still have numerous profiles on
Mm-hmm.
Facebook. They haven't
Yeah.
changed anything because um, there's no consequences
Mm-hmm.
for having more than one profile. How is that enforced?
Right.
You
Right.
can use any combination of anything and make up a profile on Facebook because it's not linked to your ID or your social security. It's not linked to anything. There's no mechanism of checking um, to say, who you say you are.
Well, they can't even check their age. So we have a lot of people who are underage, I think it's 13 or 12 for Facebook, who just say they're older, so they can see everything. And that's common on YouTube as well. So, yeah, and the other problem is that the platforms don't evenly apply their policies to everyone. So, we just had this battle going on YouTube with the person who was gay bashing. And YouTube says, well, that's those are opinions. Those are strong opinions, not hate speech, right? And then you've got on Facebook and Twitter the controversy over the doctored videos that were, that was used to make, well, here in the United States, I know I'm being specific to what's happening here, but doctoring the videos and using it politically against the Democrats. And Facebook would not take it down. They said that they limited its reach. And then a new doctored video, a deepfake video, came out with um, Zuckerberg as a target. And so everybody was wondering, are you going to leave that video up too? And they kind of had to, because they have to be fair. But yeah, I mean, How are these platforms even going to keep up with different ways that people use technology to harm others?
Hmm. I see that this as one of the huge challenges is that the platforms, I was doing a bit of research earlier on Facebook, for example. Now, Twitter says that they don't permit doxing or naming and shaming, and yet it's rife. It's absolutely rife. It's like a free for all on Twitter when it comes to doxing and naming and shaming, and yet they say it's against their policies, but I don't see them enforcing it, or the way that they enforce it is not even handed.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different interpretations. Now, I had a look at Facebook, for example, in terms of, so they've got variations of what they would recognize as naming and shaming. And I found, there were discrepancies in terms of racial demographics that made themselves guilty of naming and shaming. And Facebook seems to discriminate on the basis of racial profiling when it comes to naming and shaming. And there's so many gray areas. And I think that's probably one of the issues that we've got, is that the social media platforms can't even agree on a definition.
I mean,
And
the bottom line
until
is it's humans making these decisions, and humans have their own biases, hidden or open, and those influence the decisions that they make. That's where all this, uneven application of these policies is coming from. It's because these different platforms have different agendas.
So one of the things I saw on Facebook, for example, that people were complaining about is the fact that the moderators may be of a certain ethnicity or social status or whatever, and it's left entirely up to them to make that decision. In other words, you're not having I don't know if one should call it a board or a panel, for example, made up of various demographics that could make a better combined decision than leaving it up to one person, for example, that's of a different demographic, and they may say, well, I think it's okay. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but that's how it seems from a public perspective. And
Yeah,
that's why
especially
there's
with
no
YouTube.
even, yeah.
Yeah, totally agree with you there.
Anyway, I think we can, we need to work towards something needs to change, because this current status quo is not working for us. So an interesting thing is, if you were caught doxing or naming and shaming, and you actually made yourself criminally liable, um, you cannot escape the consequences. And I think that is one thing that you need to consider, that there may be legal consequences, because we talked about this last week as well, and again, I want to reiterate that I do believe that Facebook does need to take, and I know I'm harping on one social media platform, but I believe that they conditioned us to like and share too quickly. We've been conditioned over a period of time to do that, and so people don't take a second to think about the consequences.
Yeah,
We're too
that's
quick
true.
on liking and sharing, and once you've done that, I think an aspect that we forget about the internet is that it's so easy to screenshot anything and everything. So even if you decide to delete that tweet, or you decide to delete that Facebook post, chances are high that someone out there have screenshot your post or your tweet
Right.
already. And so perhaps that leads into another question of, how do we keep safe online? Would you say, what are some of the things that we could do to keep ourselves safe?
Well, obviously we can't control what other people do to us, but what we can do now is take a look at all the profiles that we have on different platforms. If you ever use Twitter, if you ever use MySpace, if you were ever on Hello, if you're ever, and even platforms you just forgot that you used to be interested in, go back and see if you can log into those. If you can't, recover your password, delete those profiles if you're not using them. The idea is to get rid of anything that is not needed by you. You can always recreate a profile if you want to, but get rid of anything you're not using. I would also go back and look at past posts. Maybe you were a little too forthcoming about your personal data. We've talked about this before, where for fun, your friend might post a list of questions online. What's your favorite this? What's the street you grew up on? All that's kind of fun until somebody uses it and knows your personal information and can use it as part of an attack. And it doesn't have to be for doxing. I mean, just knowing those things gives people enough information to try to get into your account, because these accounts use questions like, what street did you grow up on? What is your mother's maiden name? And those are things you may have innocently answered when your friend posted those quizzes. So go back, delete that stuff. So that's a couple of ideas. Also, strong passwords make it more difficult for people to get into your accounts and to see your personal data. And I have to name this before I turn it back to you for your ideas. There are websites online that do collect that information about you. For example, mylife.com. You can actually write to some of these sites or look up their policies and then submit a request to have your data removed. So that's an idea to see if you can lock your data away. So those are three things.
You mentioned something interesting, about how you could innocuously have posted something in the past. And sometimes, you can have something very innocent, people starting a remember when kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, in that conversation of remember when, you could be releasing personal data about yourself or your family without giving it a second thought. And once it's out there, it's out there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, airing your dirty laundry because you're having a fight with your brother or your ex or your current spouse and putting all that out there, you're just handing people your personal life information. And who knows who's going to be able to use that in the future. We all already know that when you're looking for a job, you might not want your future boss to see that fight you have with your neighbor. You need to be careful about the personal stuff that you're posting.
Alison, you've just touched on something now that is almost a trap for doxing or naming and shaming, and that is an aggrieved spouse or ex-spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend. You often see this on social media, someone that feels aggrieved because the relationship went sour, and so almost as a means of revenge, they will release personal information about the ex partner.
Yeah, including
Um,
pictures.
yeah. And it can get incredibly nasty. And I think very often in the heat of the moment, you may not think about how that could affect you personally, you know, for that job promotion, for example,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
um, or whatever else may come up in your career. And so one's got to, and I think for me, the take home from our conversation is that you need to unlearn what Facebook has taught us
mm-hmm.
to hit the share and like button so quickly. You need to hit the pause button instead
Yeah. And I think
and
the other
think
thing,
about the consequences.
right. I also think that your tone and the things that you find worth saying, you need to think about twice. A lot of us, myself included, will have a knee-jerk reaction in a group, maybe a Facebook group where you're talking about whatever, and somebody says something you don't like, or they say something insulting, and so you insult that person back without, because it's so easy to do. Just hit the comment, just hit reply. You don't have to think, so you can go back and forth as if you were talking. And we forget that we always have that choice to pause. We don't have to post, and we can delete it. It doesn't have to be there forever. Delete it if you've said something. But think about what you do and say before you do it. Because just because Facebook says you can do it and encourages you to do it, doesn't mean it's in your best interest.
I think that's kind of a light bulb point there. Just because something is legal doesn't mean it's morally right, or it doesn't mean that it will abscond you from the consequences
Exactly.
um, of your actions. And so, whether or not a platform permits something or allows something to happen will also not free you from the consequences. So if Facebook has permitted a post to go through that causes harm, or Twitter, or which, YouTube, whatever, But if that results in harm to another person and you become criminally liable, it's very likely that the platform isn't going to offer you blanket kind of protection and pay, to keep you out of jail or free you from the consequences.
Yeah.
So I think we need to sit back and realize that whatever we do at the end of the day, we can and will be held responsible in our personal capacity.
Mhm. Definitely. And those are real people at the other end. It's easy to just see them as a smart aleck name or a nickname or something, and attack the person for that name, because the person has a different political view or, something like that. And we do that all the time because the name is provocative. They do it on purpose, and they're there to kind of incite something. And so we respond, oh, you probably like so-and-so. You're probably a blah, blah, blah. We've all seen that. And then before you know it, it's back and forth about nothing. You don't even know each other. So we've been taught by social media to have those kind of interactions. Not, this wasn't the intention, but that's what it's become.
I think you've kind of just, reminded me about an aspect that we may not think about often is the fact that because we are not forced to show our real pictures on social media, people hide behind avatars and any picture of their choice. They even steal someone else's image these days,
Oh,
and that
yeah,
happens.
catfish.
Yeah, that happens every single day. And so I wonder if that doesn't add to dehumanizing the person on the other side, because you
Yeah.
don't think of them as being human. You just look at this profile
Mm-hmm.
that, and I'm going all in to attack this profile. And we forget that behind that profile is a human being
Mm-hmm.
with a family to support.
Yeah.
um, and more so, behind that profile is somebody with feelings, with a life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think somehow we've lost the ability to humanize the connections, and it's one of the things that I like about live streaming, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It's because you can't hide.
No. Yeah, and Facebook
you
is
you
going in
have
that
to show
direction.
the real you.
Yes, you do. You do. And that's why Facebook is talking about switching to a platform that's more like Snapchat. You know how much I love Snapchat. And Snapchat does not have the same problems that Facebook has because the tools that Snapchat gives you encourages creativity and originality. It's not about forwarding what somebody else did and really not being yourself. You're just copying pictures and slogans and infographics and whatever memes without expressing who you are and showing the real person. So it's a little bit harder to see somebody and be nasty towards them because that interaction is really based on curiosity and kindness and learning. I mean, that's what happens with face-to-face interactions, and Facebook wants to go in that direction.
Yeah. Alison, we have come to the end of 30 minutes. I can't believe the time went by so quickly. So I want to just put this out there. If you have ever been the subject of naming and shaming or doxing, how did you deal with it? What did you do? Were there any consequences for people who engaged in this practice? Um, and I think another question I want to leave with you is, if you see doxing or you see naming and shaming, would you engage? Would you encourage it? Would you discourage it? Would you turn the blind eye? Would you turn the other cheek and pretend you didn't see it? Do you look the other way? Let us know in the comments. It'd be great to get some feedback, because I think this is probably this is a conversation we will be talking about again for sure.
Most definitely. Okay, well,
Anyway, any closing thoughts, Alison?
really, I just want to say that what Safer Social Media is all about is starting that conversation and continuing it and building on skills that we're learning and applying out those skills to other situations and seeing how they fit. We're really about grassroots attempts to make the internet safer for ourselves. The idea is that we cannot wait for legislation, we can't wait for platforms to come up with laws. We need to start looking out for ourselves and taking on safer behaviors on our own. And so we are going to share that information with you, and hopefully we'll have guests who will, share some tips on their own. We've got some great conversation on Twitter and some just really great ideas. So looking forward to more.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing your comments and your views, and we will definitely be having this conversation again. So from me, Bridgetti Limbanda in Cape Town, it's goodbye for now.
And adios from Las Vegas.